Hello everyone, my name is Andrew, today we continue learning Python, and today we'll continue working with our financial exchange in Python. So let's start. In the previous video, we added our auth routers for our FAST API users and finished with their basic configuration. Of course, it's not the whole idea about users, so we're not going to finish with just authentication and registration. We're going to improve them in the future and change a lot of stuff. But for now, what I want to do, I want to fix some bugs, because I found some serious bugs. Then I want to add registration routes so we can register our user and check how can we improve our responses even more. So let's start. Let's start with the bugs because there are lots of them. So the first bug that I found is if we go to main.py, we can see run forever. And we don't really need it because if we go to our main function here, we can see that we have run API. And that run API function basically runs our ASGI server for FAST API. And that's basically it. So we have await here and await in run API. And I don't think that we're going to need run forever, because if that's the case, if I'm going to run my program, I'm not going to be able to stop it. So even if I press stop or even if I somehow close it, it's still going to run forever because of that event.loop run forever asynchronous statement. So we don't want that. We want our program to finish when I press stop. Kind of like that. So that's the first bug. It's not that severe, but still, it's annoying. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing is that if we go to settings.py, here we have our database configuration. And as I said in the previous video, database configuration for our Tortoise ORM allows us to configure our models, configure our connections, and all that stuff. So you can see here we have connections, we have applications, models, and all of those. What I want to do here is add our users' models to that database configuration, because if that's the case, if I'm going to go to my database, so database FinDevDB English, here I only have iReach, and iReach is a tool that allows us to migrate our project. So it's a migration tool. You can see ID, version, application, and content. What I want to do is add our models from database user models, kind of like that user model, to our migrations, kind of like that. So what I'm going to do is go to settings and database config. Here in models, I'm going to add our database.users.models. So now our application is going to add our FAST API users models to that project, and everything is going to be fine. And I may be a little bit fast, but there are tons of bugs in here. So what we need to do next is go to database users models, so the file that we just included in our database configuration. And here, what's very important is that if we go to database schemas, so the schemas that allow us to work with our users, so you can see user create, user update, user DB, and all that stuff. The problem is that our user adds username. So username is a field that we added. It's a custom field, so FAST API users do not have username by default. And what we are supposed to do in our models is add that field as well. Because if we don't add that field in our user model here, our user schemas, so user create, user update, are not going to be working with that field at all. So we're not going to have any username. And most of all, that username is not going to be saved in the database. So even if I add username in my schema, I also need to add it in my model. That's really important. So let's add username equals fields.char field. Kind of like that. Let's import our fields from tortoise.fields. And here in char field, we need to add max length. So max length, for example, 100. And if we go to schemas, we need to add that max length as 100 in here as well. And you may know that we don't add just raw integers, just like that, because that integer does not tell us anything. So it's just like 100. So what does it mean? We need to add a setting. Settings dot, let me do it with min username length, but I'm just going to change it to max username length. Now let's go to settings. Let's find that min username length, and let's add max username length after it. So environment.int max username length. So basically I did the same as I did with min username length. So we're just getting our username length from our .env file. And here we can find our min username length let's add another field, max username length, which is gonna be 100. It doesn't matter for now, but let's just do it like 100. Okay, so that is our environment. And now everything should work fine, because in our models we have our max username length variable from our settings. We added to char field as a max length, and yeah, that's kind of it. Aside from that, we also need to add it in our field here. So let's add it. 1, 2, 3, max length, settings, max username length. So you may already see a problem here. The problem is that we copy the same field 3 times. And what we can do in order to avoid it is just create a function, get username field, kind of like that, and let's just return that object from here, just like that. And then and then we are just going to change that field to get username field, kind of like that. So there is nothing really complicated in here. The only thing that we did is added a new field inside of our user model, and added a new variable inside of our field in our schemas. And also we added get username field in order not to repeat ourselves. So now we can just call 3 functions, or even 4, 5 functions wherever we need a username. So just add those functions here, and that's it. So that's the only thing that we need to do. Alright, so now I think everything is fine, but we need to also do arich migrate and arich upgrade, because I want to show you our migrations. As you can see, migrations, one SQL file was just added here, and migrations allow you to upgrade your database, kind of like that. So we execute some SQL statements in order to get any state of the database or any state of database schema at any point in time. So now, as you can see, the second migration tells us that we are going to create our user model table if it does not exist. We have all the fields here, and we also need to create an index for our ID. Simple stuff. And downgrade allows you to go back. So if we want to roll back our migration, we can use downgrade. That's how it works. Okay, so now we need to apply those migrations, and I'm going to run arich upgrade. If I'm going to go to database and let's update it, we can see that we have our user model. There is nothing in here, but we have it, and that's what matters. So now we can save our users. That was a really important bug, because if we would not add username, or if we would not add our user models to the settings, we would be never able to work with them. So those would not be included. So yeah, kind of like that. Okay, now we have our users included. Everything should work fine, and let's run our project. Let's run it. It works, kind of like that. Let's go to our base URL, and as you can see, it says detail not found, because we don't have that URL yet. What I want to do here is go to /docs, because FastAPI includes Open API and Swagger docs by default. So Open API and Swagger docs are kind of like the documentation for all the APIs. It's kind of like a schema for your APIs. We can see here that we have 2 post routes. The first one is GVT login. The second one is GVT logout. We also have some schemas. So what's the body for our auth? What's the error model? What's the validation error? What's just validation error? I don't know what's the difference between HTTP validation and... Oh yeah, so HTTP validation I think includes validation error inside of it, but validation error is just an error itself. So what do we need to do here? Here we can see all of our routes. For now we only have 2 routes, so GVT login and GVT logout. And what we can do is go here and press on try it out in order to send our post request. So I think you know that our browsers do not send post requests when we just go to a page. If I go and type google.com, my browser will not make a post request by itself. We can only program it to make post requests. We cannot do it in our browser. Browser is not a development tool. And that is why we need some kind of a system that will allow us to send post requests, put requests, patch requests, and all kinds of HTTP and not only HTTP requests to our server. And that tool is called Postman. But for now, let's just go to our docs and let's just try to send some information. So you can see here we have username and password. As username, I'm going to provide Andrey, and as password, something like that. Obviously, we don't have that user yet, but let's just execute our code. And we'll see that we have detail, login, bad credentials. Everything is great. So we have bad credentials, but we don't have that user. But what I mean by that is that everything works fine, as it was supposed to. And yeah, kind of like that. So now we can send our requests. But of course, that's not the way we're going to do it, because it's unsustainable. We cannot save it. We cannot save the information that we put in here. We cannot send those. We cannot send our body to other users. We cannot. We can't do anything. It's just a documentation for you. So you can just look at it, know what you need to send, know how you need to send it, know all the errors. Yes, see every outcome, and that's it. But you can't really use it as a development tool. What we want to do is go to postman.com. And Postman is an application that will allow you to send all types of requests and build your own APIs. So it's free. You can download it somewhere here. I think here, download desktop app. Check that your URL is postman.com. And then once you have that application, you can see it here. So that is my Postman. I have one collection called FinDev here, and I'm going to create another one. So let's just remove that. And let's add a new collection called FinDev-Eng. Kind of like that. Let's actually do it kind of like that. I'm gonna rename that backend to be FinDev, because as you know, I have two versions of FinDev. One is for my Russian channel and one is for the English channel that you are watching right now. And inside of the Russian channel, I already created our test schema, but I'm gonna go through all of it again. So Postman allows you to send all kinds of requests to your servers. And what we need to do here is create our own schema. So create our API to show what's the data that we need to send to that API, show what is the URLs that can be used in order to access some resources, and show what are the methods of those URLs. The first thing that I want to do is create a new folder. So click here, add folder, and I'm gonna name it as auth, so authentication. Or let's actually name it users, because we're gonna have lots of methods with users, but not all of them are related to authentication. So I'm gonna have that folder structure, our users, and then authentication. And inside of authentication, I'm gonna have a method called login. So I pressed here and add request. As you can see, we have users, auth, login, and it's kind of like a file system, so file folder system, which has requests as files. And of course, it's not a file, but it's kind of like an analogy. What do we have in our request? If I click on it, it will open that window. We have lots of things. The first one is our request. So as you can see, we have get, post, put, patch, delete, and there are tons of other methods for our requests. So we even have options, we even have view, prop find, I don't even know what that is, purge, unlink, link, options, copy, head, all of the stuff. You would typically use 5 of those, so get, post, put, patch, delete, maybe head and options, and maybe, those are all the requests I typically use. Others are really, really specific. So for now, what we need to do? We need to go to our docs once again. To our docs, so let me open our page right here, and let me go to docs. And inside of those docs, we can see that we have gvt/login at post. So let's go to our Postman and let's do the following. HTTP localhost port 8000 gvt login. Kind of like that. If I'm gonna send my request right now, you can see, so here is a send button, you can see that we have detail method not allowed. If I'm gonna send post request, you can see that we have another error. So what happened here? When I send get request, our FAST API said that that method is not allowed because we only accept post requests for our login routes. But when I send post request, you can see that we have our errors because we do not provide our username and we do not provide our password. And that is a typical Pydantic error that allows you, or FAST API. No, it's from Pydantic, I think. No, it's from Fast API with Pydantic. Yeah, from Fast API with Pydantic. That allows you to see that we don't have some fields included in our request. And here we don't have our username and we don't have our password. So two fields which are really important because they are required. You can see field required as a message. And in order to add those fields, we can go to body, and here we have xwww form URL encoded. It's really strange, but Fast API users has two body types. So you know that we have millions of things we can send in our request body. So we can have form data, can have form which is encoded, we can have raw data with JSON. So as you can see, we can choose raw and then JSON and write our own JSON objects, our JSON in general. But for some reason, Fast API users uses two body types. The first one is, of course, JSON, so we just send JSON information. But the second one, and it's only for login, is form URL encoded. I'm not sure why do they do that. Maybe it's for security for some reason, but I'm not sure. What I'm gonna do now is go to GVT login and here to xwww form URL encoded. And here what we can do is add our username, and we can see that we can have value here. So the first one is key, the second one is value. For example, Andrey. Then you can have description, but I'm not gonna bother you with that. And password is gonna be something like that. Let's run our request, and as you can see, login bad credentials. Though the same thing that we got in here. Login bad credentials. That's great, but there are some problems. The first problem that I saw, and we did not fix it, is that we just have gvt/login. So it's not related to Postman, it's not related to our project in general, but it's related to the API. Because I want to group our API depending on the things that our API does. So if that URL, that route is related to users, it's gonna have users prefix at the start. If our route is related to products, it's gonna have products at the start. So that's how I typically build APIs, and I think it's a great way to do it because you can see that I'm accessing users. You don't want to guess what is GVT login. Just know that you're accessing users, and GVT login is somehow related to those users. So what we need to do is add the users prefix at the at the start of our GVT login route. Let's go to our project, and here in our API and in our API users API right here, we're gonna add our prefix to the we're gonna add it in API here, where we create our Fast API application. Here what I'm gonna add is users at the start of our routers. So we include those routers in our application. I talked about that in the previous video, and you can see that we add users at the start. Nothing complicated. Now let's rerun our application. Okay, and if I'm gonna refresh my docs, you can see that we have our users right here. So /users GVT login. Everything works fine because we start with our users. Now let's go to Postman once again, and here, I already added my users. If I'm gonna send my request again, I'm gonna go to the same page. So that is perfectly fine. What I want to add now is variables for our FinDev. Let's go to environments. Here I already have one environment. Let me rename it to FinDev. And let's create another environment called FinDev English. And what is an environment? Environment is basically all of the variables that you want to store in your collection. So here we have our username. Here we have our password. I don't want to expose my password and probably my username to my requests. Then we can have something that comes up really often in our requests. For example, HTTP localhost 8000. So our host is going to be really frequent in our request, because each request that we're going to write is going to have a localhost 8000 in it, because we want to make requests to that specific URL. And what we can do is actually get that URL inside of a variable. So whenever we need to change it, we can just change that one variable. We don't want to go through all of the routes and change our host manually. Let's go to FinDev Eng, and here I'm going to add host as the first variable. type is going to be default. Type is basically either default or secret. Secret is the value that is hidden. Default is a normal value. So initial value is a value that you are going to have by default if you copy that collection. And by the way, you can find that collection in the description down below, so you don't need to recreate it yourself. If you want, it's going to be better because you're going to understand how you can create those collections yourself, but yeah, you can just copy it. So type is going to be default, initial value is going to be HTTP, localhost, port 8000, and I'm just going to copy that value and paste it to current value, just like that. And now if I'm going to go to login, what I can do is just go here and change our host, so our manual host, to a variable, which is going to contain host inside of the double curly braces. Now if I'm going to send the request, you can see that the request is the same, and we can even go to console on the left corner here, and we can see that we send our request to the same. So I'm just going to send another request. You can see it appeared here, and it still goes to the same URL, because variables just simply allow us to change the values when we run our requests. That's not some kind of magic, so they just change the value, that's it. Then let's use username and password as variables as well. So username, initial value is going to be none because each person is going to have a different username, but current value is going to be something like Python on Papyrus. And password, let's add it here as well. So password is going to be a secret because we don't want to expose our password to anyone. And then let's just write a bunch of characters in here. Now what we can do is go to our body and change that value from the row username to our username variable, and the same goes for password. Kind of like that. If I'm going to send my request again, let me send it. As you can see, login, bad credentials. And if you want to send your request with a keyboard, what you can do is Ctrl-Enter. So Ctrl-Enter is going to send the request. You don't need to go to that send with your mouse each time. So as you can see, we have login, bad credentials. It's great for now because we have not created our user yet. And let's actually do it. So let's add our user registration route to our project. Let's go to findefeng, and here inside of the users API, I'm going to create a new function called define get register route or router. Router, because we're going to return a router, so let's define get register router. As you probably know from the last video, we have two types of I don't know how to say it, two types of URL creators in Fast API. So we have routes. Route is a single URL, but router is a collection of URLs grouped together. And register router is, so our function is going to return a register router, not route. So that's why it's better to call it router, not a route. And what I want to do here is return Fast API users, so the object that we created in the previous video, Fast API users dot get register router. And that's basically it. That's the only thing that we need to do. Now let's go to API where we create our application, and here after we included our authentication routers, what we can do is use app.include router. So the router is going to be get register router. Let's import it, and the prefix is going to be prefix users. That's it. So users is the only thing that we need to put. And what's the difference between that register and that auth routers? So the difference is that when we register our user, we just create it. So we don't log in with some special method. We just create our user, and the only thing that we need to do is send the information to the server. That's it. So we only create our user. And the information is going to be the same for the mobile application, for web applications, for desktop applications, for any types of applications. However, when we use our authentication, we may have different types of authentication. So we may have GVT authentication, the one that we created in the last video. So here it is, GVT authentication. We can have something like Google authentication, session authentication, Redis database authentication, whole lot of stuff. And that is why we have getAuthBackends function here, and we use that function inside of our users API in order to create all of the routes, or sorry, all of the routers that may be used for different types of authentication. So we're going to have something like users GVT login, then users Google login, then users session login, kind of like that. And all of those are going to be used for different platforms. But just for now, we are only going to use GVT. That's the only thing. But in the future, if we want to add some kind of authentication, the only thing that we need to do right now is just add it inside of that getAuthBackends. Because that getAuthBackends is going to be called inside of the users right here, and we're going to build our router ourselves. And then we're going to add it to our application automatically. So that's what we achieved in the last video, and that is why we need to use that for loop for each router in our authentication routers. However, for the registration, we don't have that problem because the only thing that we have is just a registration. It's going to be the same for mobiles, for desktop applications, for just our raw API users, for everybody. And that is why I just only need to include that router one time. I don't need to run some kind of a loop for one router. So it's just one router that is going to receive our information. Let's rerun our project. I think you know what I mean by all of that, by that whole speech. And here we have a problem. A path prefix must not end with a slash. Yeah, we just need to remove that slash from our register router. Let's run it. And now everything works fine. If I'm gonna go to our documentation, well, I just can refresh it right here. Yeah, I can just refresh it right here, and you can see that we have our third route, which is called users register. So that route is gonna allow us to register our user. You can see that there are tons of values here, so email, password, is active, is super user, and is verified are going to be removed in the future, so that's a really important thing to do. But for now, I think that's completely fine. So we have our user register router. Let's go to our Postman, because we're not going to send any requests from our documentation. It's only for us to look at what we have in our project. So let's go to our users register. I'm going to create a new file here. So a new request here, which is going to be called register, kind of like that. As you can see, I didn't create it in auth folder because it's not related to that authentication. And let's rename our login to login GVT actually. So we can see that we have different types of logins, but the same type of registration. And in register, we're going to send post request to our host, so variable host, which is going to allow us to add that HTTP localhost 8000, and then users/register. Let's run our request, and you can see that we have our missing field in here. If I'm going to go to body, to raw, and then to JSON, and if I'm going to create a JSON object in here and send it once more, you can see that now we have a more descriptive error. So login GVT, or any type of login in our REST API users, uses form URL encoded, but register uses raw JSON, and that's why we need to use different types of body methods in here, so for URL encoded or raw JSON. And you can see that we have an error here. It says that location of that error is body email and field required. So the only thing that we need to do is add our email, and of course I'm going to add it as a variable. So let's go to our environments, findev, and by the way, if you don't know, you need to check that your environment is selected in here. So by default, you're going to have no environment, but you need to go to findev-env, kind of like that. So yeah, that is findev. That's not the one I wanted. Here we have our environment, and what I want to do is add our email, password, and username are already in our variables. So the only thing that I want to add is email. Initial value is going to be none because we don't have an initial value for an email. It's going to be different for everyone, but the value that I'm going to put in here is going to be andrey@mail.com, kind of like that. Let's go to register once more, and here in those quotes, I'm going to put a variable, kind of like that, which is going to be email. Then after comma, I'm going to put my password, which is going to be password. And then after that, I'm going to put a username and comma, not a dot. And then I'm gonna put username, which is gonna be my username. Let's run our project, and you can see that we added our user. So it says that our ID is that UI ID, email is that, is active as true, is super user as false, is verified as false, username is Python on Papyrus, and version is 1.0.0. Everything works perfectly fine. What I want to do now is go to login GVT and try it again. Login bad credentials. Why is that? It's kind of like a bug in FastAPI, because when we want to log in our FastAPI, we want to use key as a username, but value as an email. Now, yeah, you can see now, but if I'm gonna go to headers, and so headers, you can see that there is a header called setCookie, and that header allows us to see our authentication here. And I can go to cookies in here, and we can see that FastAPI user auth was added. So that is our GVT token, that is our authentication. And if you don't remember, we added our authentication, so to transport, there is a cookie transport. And here it is, our FastAPI authentication. Pretty cool. So we added our authentication, everything works fine. Now I can even log out of my, let me add a request called logout GVT. I can even log out from my account. So let's add host from users GVT logout. Let's send it, and as you can see, unauthorized. Oh yeah, that's a problem, and I'm going to talk about that in the next video. But the problem is that our Postman does not save cookies by default. So the cookies that are saved in that login GVT are not going to be moved to logout GVT. So you can see that we have unauthorized, but we're going to work with that in the next video. For now, you can just see that that route works. So yeah. So what is the problem, the last problem that we have with our project for now? The last problem is that if we take a look at our response in user register, we can see that we have ID, email is active, so all the fields, and then version. All of them go with each other, and that may be really bad, because version is a metadata here, but all the other fields are required for our user. So all the other fields is basically our response. So yeah, our response in here. And what I want to do now is just go to our to our API and go to custom JSON response in here. And custom JSON response is the thing that allows us to add our version. So I think you remember from the first or the second video, we have our version in here. But what I want to do is, instead of all of that, I'm just basically gonna do it kind of like that. So return super from custom JSON response, and instead of render content, I'm just gonna open up a dictionary, which is gonna contain data as our content, and then version as our settings API version. So the only thing that we changed is we changed from our version and all the other metadata being with the main body to it being separate from our data. So data is the content that we need to get from the content that our server sent to us. But version is the content for our metadata. So maybe we want to look at different versions of our API, and version will allow us to distinguish them. And if I'm gonna rerun my request once again, yeah, register user already exists. Yeah, let me just quickly change my username or email. Yeah, we need to add the unique on username. That's a great point. But let me quickly change my email to andrey2@gmail.com. And if I'm gonna resend my request, you can see that now we have our new user. So the problem was that we already had that email in our system, in our database, and it would not allow us to register with the same email twice. Now I changed it, and as you can see, we have data as with ID, email is active, is super user, is verified with username, and all that stuff. And we also have version as metadata in a separate location. And that is much better, because now we can distinguish between the real data that we want to work with and the metadata that we may use in order to do something with our API. So metadata will go with our version, and data will go with in our data object. Kind of like that. So thank you for watching. My name is Andrew. Subscribe to my channel, leave a like, leave a comment, and bye bye.